To give a little background, you Max. Just to get a little background, Home Base is going to be presenting this training today. Me and my colleague Max. Max, if you can raise your hand. And just to give background on Home Base, we're a nonprofit organization providing technical assistance and training to the Office of Supportive Housing and Housing and Homelessness Service Providers in Santa Clara County. Once we're done with housekeeping, we are going to be recording this training, as you've heard previously, and we'll make the recordings available on the CoC website, and we'll send out the slides to you all, and we'll post it as well on the SPN CoC listserv. And just to get familiar with a little bit of Zoom, if you have any questions, comments, or responses, please use the chat. If you want right now, you can put your name and the organization you're with on the chat just to get a little familiar with it. And if you have any tech issues, you can always email me at sadaka@homebasecc.org, or you can directly chat me or Max. And then we're also going to ask you all to stay on mute just to cut down on some background noise. And if you have any questions or anything come up, please use the chat, or always feel free to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And then just to give you a preview of what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be going over eligible costs. So a recap of the LMS course that you all have previously enrolled in, do a little bit of a modeling activity, and then also going over rent reasonableness, doing a recap over that as well, and an activity. And then a CoC activity, which is separate from the LMS that you all were familiar with. It's a little bit of a game, so it should be a lot of fun. This training is very interactive. And then you also will have time for question and answers at the end. And just so folks know what's coming up toward the end, we do have a CoC activity QR code. Max, if you want to go over this a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, thanks, Sadaka. So, hey, everyone. Kahoot is like a online quiz game format. Some of you may already be familiar with it. It is easier, I find, to participate in the quiz through your mobile device if you have one available. You can scan the QR code on screen right now so that you can start downloading the app right now. And then when we get to the end of towards the end of today's session, then you can use your device to actually plug in your answers for the quiz. It is possible to just do it on your desktop computer as well, but I can find it's a little clunky trying to see the screen that we're sharing and also the screen where you actually select your responses. So just a quick recommendation, you might consider scanning that QR code and downloading the app to your device. Oh, and it's going to be a competitive session. Winner for today gets a prize.
Thank you, Max. And then just to get a little understanding where you all are today, I'm going to post a Zoom poll just to see if you finished the CoC 101 e-course that we launched earlier this month and a little bit of last year. Let's see. Did it come up on your screens? Let's see. Anybody seen the launch? Are you seeing it, Max?
The poll has not launched, as far as I can tell. Oh, I think I can launch it.
Oh, okay.
There to go. There it is. Yeah, no problem. All right, so this first poll question, we're just checking to see how many of you had a chance to finish the e-course on the Bridge LMS system, the learning management system that we announced by email. Cool. All right, so I see we've got a lot of fresh faces in the room. So far, I think just one person interacted with LMS before coming to today's session, which is totally fine. It's a busy time of year, especially right around the holidays. Everybody's adjusting back to the flow of things.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
Sounds good. Which is totally fine. Like Max said, we'll just We can go definitely, if you have any questions, if you want us to slow down on any parts, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat or raise your hand and ask any questions that you may have. So we're gonna go now into eligible cost. Just so you all know, on the LMS course, we did break it down. So now we're back working on your program with the eligible, I am so sorry, y'all. If one of your costs is eligible, we're going to walk through how you can use this resource to help match budget line items with eligible cost categories. This was also a part of the learning management system course. Feel free to still use that even after this training. I think it's a great resource that you can get a little bit more familiar with eligible cost. Here, also want to start just before we get into the details of eligible costs, it's important to understand the difference between eligible and approved costs under the CoC program. Both types of costs are allowable. So for eligible costs, are all those costs that are included in the CoC program interim rule, such as rental assistance, leasing supportive services, operating costs, all of which we will cover today. And then approved costs are the budget line items specifically approved by HUD in project grant agreements. As a part of the annual CoC program competition, each applicant submits an application to HUD with a project budget. This budget requests CoC program funds to pay for specific costs such as leasing, HMIS. HUD reviews this project application and budget. If approved as submitted, incorporates it into the project's grant agreement with HUD. There are exceptions. So if a project requests supportive services or operations costs, if it is not limited to the specific budget line items requested through the application in those categories, the project can spend awarded funds on any eligible supportive services or operations cost. And just so you all can see some of basically the categories of eligible costs that I just read off. You see here we have rental assistance, leasing, supportive services, administrative costs, and operating costs. Today, though, we're going to go over rental assistance, leasing, and supportive costs as well. And then Max will be going over rent reasonableness a little later on. And so just to give you all warmed up, we're going to kind of start with another poll. Max, if you can launch that, I don't think I can do it on my end. Just to get you warmed up and see how comfortable you are. So the first question we have for the example, mileage and staff vehicles to serve clients. What eligible cost category might this fall under?
Hopefully folks can see the poll I've just launched. So again, the question is, if you were trying to bill HUD for mileage that went onto a staff vehicle in order to serve clients, where would you bill according to the CoC interim rule? Okay. Seeing operating as a popular choice. I think the key word here might be serving a client. So, all right.
Okay,
We'll call it there.
There we go. So yeah, see a lot of folks put operating costs, but still see a lot of folks too put supportive services. As you see, it is supportive services. It will be supportive services under transportation. And we're gonna just break down a little bit what that means. Someone asked me a direct question, sorry. Let me just pull that up. Max, do you mind if you break down a little bit the differences between operating cost and supportive services? Someone asked a direct question around, I don't fully understand why it would be supportive services.
Yeah, happy to. So, and we're going to actually see this kind of play out as we do more of these exercises. Some of these distinctions, it kind of defies common sense from time to time. And so it's important to always kind of keep the CoC interim rule in your back pocket. I think literally have it bookmarked in your browser so that you can quickly go. And we're going to show you exactly where to find the CoC interim rule. There's a couple different places on the web. Personally, I think one of them is a little better than the other. But anyway, when you go there, it will spell out different activities underneath each of those different cost categories. So maybe Sadaka, can you pull up the next slide? It's a good one.
Oh, wait, let's see. This is just.
I just wanted to see the list of categories of eligible costs again. I think it was slide 11. There it is. Yeah. So again, every activity that we perform and we bill that money to our HUD grant needs to fit neatly into one of these 5 categories, obviously. And operating and supportive services are one of those pitfalls where we have a tendency, there's a lot of overlap and not necessarily intuitive exactly which one of those categories it's going to fall into. But generally speaking, I think you can think of supportive services as anything that is most related to service to the client, right? It's maybe a little self-explanatory on its face, but you are spending that money because you are actually directly serving the client. So in this case, because you're transporting the client, say, to appointments or to employment concerns or what have you, then this mileage in the staff vehicle driving the client around is going to be billed to supportive services. By contrast, operating costs tends to be more concerned with the sort of peripheral support of the program itself. So it's going to actually pay for things like the utilities for the administrative office or the security. Security is a good example. If you have a security contractor who's actually providing security for the building where at least 50% of your units are paid for with CoC dollars, then you can use operating dollars to pay for that security. Other quick thing I'll just tack on here, supportive services is huge. There's a ton of activities in supportive services by comparison to these other categories. So kind of if you're thinking when in doubt, maybe check supportive services first. The thing you're looking for, if it's kind of an odd duck, is probably going to be under supportive services if it's eligible.
Thank you, Max. And I'm going to walk through a little bit more in detail of the differences between supportive services and administrative costs in a couple of slides soon. And if you still have any questions, please feel free to message me or Max directly if you're comfortable with that, or also put it in the chat. And we're going to actually go starting with rental assistance and leasing costs. Just to back you up a little some, with rental assistance and leasing, you'll see that funds to pay part of the full of the rent of the unit. You'll see security deposit, first and last month's rent, property damage, HQS inspections for leasing, but you won't see anything pertaining to mileage for staff vehicles to serve clients. So we know that based off of the question I just launched, that was not going to be the answer. But looking now, we can look at operating costs. With operating costs, like Max said, you can see a little bit the cost is associated with the day-to-day physical operation of a facility in which participants are housed. I see that the costs have to do with the physical operations of the facility, which participants are housed in, and I'm seeing gas, but that's not relevant, right, to the line item of mileage in staff vehicles. So that wouldn't be the correct answer to choose. Now we can go to supportive service costs. With supportive service costs here, as you can see, it can include cost of labor, including supplies, materials directly related to providing the services. Furthermore, in this example, gas for an agency vehicle used to transport clients for the purpose of providing eligible services. That seems like a close fit to the line item. So I'm feeling pretty good about that cost category, but we can look a little closer at the other eligible costs for supportive services. So if you look at eligible supportive services costs, In further detail on this list, you can see transportation. And I don't know if you all can see my mouse here, but here's transportation. So my next steps will go to the slide that talks about transportation a little further. And as you can see on this slide, I see mileage allowance for service workers to visit clients to carry out housing quality inspections. Mileage allowance is exactly what I was looking for, so this is a great match. But then again, it's been a while, so we could look over this slide deck just to make sure the other cost categories are not the eligible costs that we're looking for, just to cover our bases and triple check. So we can go now to administrative costs. With administrative costs, I'm saying this has to do with general management, oversight, training, nothing to do with mileage, so we can keep looking. And well, really nothing to do with mileage. I don't even think we actually need to keep looking. I think it's actually clear, sorry about that. It's actually clear that supportive services is the correct answer for this. And then we have another example that we want to get started on to the next one, which is going to be around rent application fee. Max, if you're okay with launching the next one.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and launch this one. And then just to say, like what everybody has just witnessed is essentially we're trying to emulate for you the process that you could do on your own to identify the different cost categories that you can bill for the different activities that you perform with your CoC grant. So the way that you watched Sadhaka step through all of the different five cost categories and ask critically, does the thing that I'm trying to do right now fit neatly into this category? And ultimately we arrived at a deep analysis on supportive services where, again, you saw all those things on that screen listed out. Supportive services has a lot of different activities in it. And so you can look closely and see, okay, transportation was under there. So that was a great place to bill mileage for driving a client around.
Actually, Max, before you launch, sorry.
Yeah.
And if this person doesn't mind, if you can directly chat with Max too, if you're comfortable doing that, asking your questions. But I'm going to go back one slide around the transportation, just to highlight. So as you can see, this is where it says mileage allowance for service workers to visit clients and to carry out housing quality inspections. And so if you're unfamiliar or you're just not sure where to look, like Max said earlier, you can always look at the CoC interim rule. They will break down what is actually under each eligible cost. So for supportive services, it will break down transportation for you. It will also talk about client travel on public transportation and program provided vehicle, and for medical care, employment, childcare, other eligible services, purchasing or leasing a vehicle to transport clients and or staff serving program participants. That's including gas, insurance, taxes, and maintenance. So it is actually a lot that follow under just transportation that will make the eligible cost category under supportive services. Sorry, I just want to go back and just reiterate that for that question. And
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
And if you have any questions, sorry, it would be helpful if you can message me, both me and Max, while I'm presenting. It's a little hard for me to see your questions while going at the same time. My apologies for any delay.
I also encourage folks, if you're, I am definitely tracking the chat closely, so I'll make sure we don't miss any questions. But if you're willing to ask them in the general chat so that everyone can see them, I think it is helpful. Everybody's here to learn, so it's always helpful to actually see the question visible for everybody. Also, just adding, I have just dropped a link to, like I said, there's a couple different places to find the CoC interim rule, but my personal favorite is the Cornell Law website, because they do a really nice job of organizing the sections within the rule. So things are neatly indented and nested underneath each other, so you can more easily follow, like when it says section 1A5 or whatever, you can kind of track diagonally down for the thing you're looking for. Just didn't want to hide the ball. All the stuff that's on the screen here is pulled directly from the interim rule It's just we're kind of tidying things up for the sake of this presentation, but all this literal text right here is found in the interim rule.
And now we're going to go to the next example, which is the rent application fee. And if everyone can participate in the Zoom pool, what eligible cost category might this fall under? That. See.
Okay, so we did put up this poll a minute ago, and we've got a pretty good number of responses here. I see most people are saying rental assistance. A handful are saying supportive services, a little leasing, and a little operating costs.
So the answer here is supportive services, housing search and counseling services. So this is another supportive service. And we're going to break down again, go through each category, see where we can find which fits best. Just to show the categories again, we have rental assistance, leasing, supportive services, administrative costs, and operating costs. For this line item, I might think rental application fees, rental assistance, they both have rental in the name. So that's where I'll start looking. So C, we're at rental assistance and leasing costs. I'm not seeing anything about rental application fees here specifically, so I'm not going to definitely rule it out, but maybe I should keep looking at other categories. The next category we can look into is operating cost. Same, I'm not seeing how it would slot into operating cost either. These categories, I mean, this cost is really about the day-to-day physical operating of a facility. So I think it's best to keep looking. And then now we're at the supportive service cost. So here, rental applications are necessary component to obtaining housing. So this might be what I'm looking for. But let's go to that slide that lists out supportive services costs in a little bit more detail to see if this is the category it falls under. Here, as you can see, the list, maybe it's under moving cost and housing search and counseling services, maybe. It's been a while. I don't remember what it entails exactly, so it might be best to look into it a little further. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Got another chat question. My apologies. I will go back to supportive services costs really quick just to answer this question. So here with supportive services costs, it is not the same as transportation. Max, if you can help me break down a little bit the differences from transportation and then housing search and counseling services. I got a question on why are those in the same bucket?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thank you for asking that question because it's a great point for us to illustrate how the terminology that we're using can be confusing, right? Because there's some overlap there. I think the word search can also be kind of, conjure up images in our heads that are similar to the words transportation. So we can imagine somebody actually searching for housing by going around town and finding units to visit and see if they're a good fit. In this case, the supportive services, again, to what I was saying earlier, is generally concerned with supporting the client in achieving their housing goals, and it's going to do that through getting them to all of the different healthcare needs and the education needs and the employment needs and all these other things that are sort of the holistic approach to the housing first method in support of the housing itself. I think it's going to get illustrated pretty clear in just a second here when Sadaka moves on to the next slide, but just to clarify that the real trick here, and I acknowledged in the chat just a moment ago that this was actually a really tricky question. I almost feel bad that we did this for the second one, but the rental application fee, it feels like something that is very closely related to rental assistance itself. It's even got rental in the name, but the trouble is you have to imagine that this person is submitting many rental applications across lots of different units in the community. And so we're not yet in the phase of actually paying out rent to somebody. We're just paying application fees to help them find a unit. And kind of similar to that, we are driving this client around town ostensibly to help them find a unit. In the earlier example, you could be driving somebody around in search of a unit. I hope that helps, but if you'd like more clarification, please do ask in the chat.
Thank you, Max. Oh, and there's a question in the chat. What would fall under housing search?
Yeah, housing search and counseling services. This next slide, I believe, is actually going to break that one down for us. And again, all this stuff is just pulled from what you would sign. Oh, okay, I see. Richmond is actually saying that the rental application fee would fall under housing search, and that's absolutely correct. The person is in search of housing, and the rental application fees, because there are probably going to be many of them, are incidental to that housing search. I hope that's making sense, and thanks, Richmond, for offering that clarification. And so, yeah, Sadaka, you've got up on screen here the breakdown of everything that falls under housing search and counseling services, and we can see there's a variety of different activities. The most important one germane to the analysis right now is down there at the bottom in the center, payment of rental application fees. But there are other things that are associated with housing search, like counseling the tenant on how to present themselves when meeting with a landlord, or helping them understand the legal ramifications of what's in a lease, mediating between property owners and landlords, credit counseling, because we know that they're probably going to run a credit check when they submit their rental application, things like that.
Thank you for going over that section, Max.
Yeah.
And then we do have one more poll question, and it's still around the eligible cost. The scenario here is a tomato plant for a participant. What eligible cost category might this fall under? We're going to launch another Zoom poll.
Sorry, we have so many poll questions in here, and Zoom has been very mean to me and didn't organize them by number. So I'm having to scan one by one to find the one about the tomato.
You're not seeing it?
No, and there are dozens in here. I think maybe it pulled in hypos from other trainings that we've done. Okay, maybe let's just shift gears, and we're going to solicit your answers in chat this time. So folks could just jump into chat and let us know, of the 5 cost categories that we've seen today, which do we think a tomato plant might fit under? And just a reminder, your options are rental assistance, leasing, supportive services, admin, or operating.
And I put the options on the screen if anyone needs it for reference.
Cool. We have a brave first guesser saying supportive services. Yes, I like it. I like it. A couple more folks. Anyone else willing to swing their weight behind? Okay, more people saying supportive services. Yes. All right.
Majority are saying supportive services. And the majority is correct. It is supportive services, mainly under food. And so we're gonna just walk through similar like we did with the last 2 questions. Let's just go through the categories to see which one best fits. Even though majority of you all have agreed that it is supportive services and that is the correct answer, I think it's best to walk through. And so we'll start off with administrative cost. My thinking here is, I'm seeing environmental reviews here. I don't know, maybe that's close enough, but maybe that doesn't fall into line. So it might be best to continue to look around. And really probably go a little bit more through admin cost. There we go. Here, as you can see on this slide, I'm seeing more points around compliance, but nothing. Are
I think
actually.
something happened with our slides here.
Yeah, this is
We should
all
be going
wrong.
in depth on supportive services.
Yeah, I just realized that.
Huh.
Sorry, you all. Apologize. Something wonky happened.
I
Hmm.
think I know what happened, and I think it's my fault. I think you and I were editing the slides at the same time, and I got a notification that something, I thought I fixed it. So this is my fault, everybody. Sorry
No
about
problem.
that. Let's step back to the previous example so that we can, let's go back to slide 23, please. So unfortunately, I think this is about as far as we're going to be able to drill down with the slide deck that we're using at this moment. This was a fun example, though, to bring up because this was actually from a real TA question that we received from one of our providers in the Santa Clara community several months ago. They were asking about a tomato plant. And I think historically speaking, when we think about using supportive services dollars to pay for food, we tend to think about groceries, right? We tend to think about, just getting food nearly ready to go for the client. But after some analysis and reading through some, you know, uh, other supporting documentation beyond the interim rule, we were convinced eventually that food could include the cost of a plant that actually bears food for the client. So it wasn't necessarily the most intuitive thing to say that we would be able to use supportive services dollars to buy a plant, but if that plant is ultimately intended to be consumed as food by the participant, then it is considered food. And it was a fun one because it it kind of allows us to pay for something that is not just food, but it's also a hobby. Perhaps the person is a budding gardener, and so there are ways to think creatively about spending your CoC dollars that can foster not just the direct goal of the thing, which is obviously in this case to feed the participant, but also sometimes if we think creatively, we can foster other goals as well, like for instance, a hobby. So sorry again about the slide deck. And we will be sure that we fix the setup of the slides. So you'll see the correct breakdown next time where we'll actually open up the food category and you can see what would naturally fit under food. We'll make sure that we fix the slide deck before we send it out to you all in the follow-up email.
Thank you. And then Max, I know this is the point where we did want to actually walk through folks of the CoC interim rule. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass it on to you. And I'm going to try to pull up, see if I can pull up to the revised slide.
Cool. All right. So while Sadako works on getting the slide deck up, just in case, because hopefully there weren't any other version control issues. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull up the interim rule on screen for you all. So I dropped a link to this earlier. In fact, for posterity, I'm going to drop it again. Okay. And sharing my screen would probably be helpful. Okay, here we are. So this is the Cornell website. Like I was talking about, Cornell Law School maintains this version of the CoC interim rule. All the text that you find in here is exactly the same as the one that's actually provided by the federal government. But I just like the way that the Cornell website organizes things. When we actually get into the rule, I'll explain why I prefer this one. So there's tons of regulations from the federal government, right? And you can see all this gibberish up here that essentially is just nesting, right? You've got all of the federal regulations from the US government. We're in Title 24, which governs all things coming from housing and urban development, regulations regarding housing and urban development, and we can see CPD in here, community planning and development, which oversees the continuum of care program alongside many others. ESG, some of you may work with, is also nested under here somewhere alongside CoC. But for today's purposes, we're talking about CoC programs. Here we are with all of our various subparts. And today we're talking about eligible costs, which you'll see is covered in subpart D. And when we open that up, you can see all of the different things that you could theoretically spend CoC dollars on. There's actually a fair number of things in this list, but most importantly, really is just the leasing, the rental assistance, supportive services, operating, admin. We just call it admin for short. It's actually project administrative costs. Um, and yeah, it's really just those five that we have a tendency to focus on the most. These other things are eligible, but we tend not to really use them or worry about them on a day-to-day basis. So actually, let's since I messed up the slides, let's go look at food. Let's go back to our tomato plant example. So we know that we're looking in supportive services already because we've already talked about the correct answer. You can see supportive services is long, right? There's a ton of stuff in here. Let me show you by comparison. If we pull up rental assistance, actually rental assistance kind of looks long. There's a lot of text in there. What's another good example? Operating, great one. Look, this is literally all of it. And it's pretty specific, tends to be concerned with utilities, security. Like I said, if you've got 50% of the units that you're paying for with that specific grant, you could pay for a security contractor to uh, patrol that building. But supportive services, like I said, tons of different categories in here, right? So we got a couple things up here that are just talking about some general ramifications around the rules. But then when we get down here to item E, that's when we actually start to see the specific things that we can pay for using supportive services dollars. And like I was saying, they actually on this website, all of the stuff that fits into item E is nested, it's indented over so that you can more easily follow. Other websites, all of these headers are just in a perfectly straight line, which kind of makes me dizzy. So strongly recommend using this website. Now, as we scroll down, I believe these are actually, yeah, they were kind enough to alphabetize these things. So here's food, item number 7, and it's the cost of providing meals or groceries to program participants. And so again, for the sake of the exercise we just did a moment ago, we were talking about a tomato plant. A plant might not necessarily fit neatly in our minds. When we read the words meals or groceries, you could make the argument that it's a grocery, but is it really? Like, we tend to think of buying tomatoes and putting them in a neat little bag and checking out at the grocery store. We don't think about actually growing the thing from seed. But like I said, we actually, one of the providers reached out to us about this question. We did some research. We talked to some people. We gathered other supporting evidence outside of the interim rule, and we were able to conclude that a tomato plant was in fact eligible under the category of food, that it did constitute a meal or grocery for the sake of the program participants. So it's just to say, even when you're looking at the interim rule, we genuinely want everybody to feel empowered to go find these categories and do some of this analysis themselves. And if you're still not convinced or you're still curious, then you can always reach out to us. And we're a bunch of nerds over here at Home Base. So we love to dig around and try to find other evidence to support, because we want to see your participants have a tomato plant. I hope that's helpful. Please do bookmark that link that I sent in the chat. Again, I've got it bookmarked right here. I visit this website probably 20 times a week. It's very handy. And it's got all the rules that govern your grant money. So let me know in the chat if you have any questions about that. I hope that was clear. And I'm going to do a quick time check. Yeah, we're looking pretty good.
So I found the older version. Doesn't have all of your updates, Max, but it's a little bit similar to what we had before. Sorry about that, everyone. As you can see, this version will have the link to in it where Max just showed you. So
There
if
it
you
is.
bookmark it, it's okay. When we send out the slides, you'll be able to get this resource as well. But did want to open it up just for a couple of questions for folks on the eligible categories. If you have any, please feel free to even, it's a small group, so feel free to even go off mute and ask your question.
All right.
Okay. Well, if
Everybody's
no,
feeling good? Feeling good
well,
about the interim rule?
that's good. Well, if you ever do need any additional assistance around eligible costs, if you have any questions, even after you looked up the interim rule and are still confused about the categories, feel free to message Homebase at our Santa Clara CoC at homebaseccc.org email. And if we don't have the answers for you and you still have questions to ask, you can always ask HUD at their question portal, and we put the link in the slide. So you can always just go to them directly if you still have questions that you haven't found the answers to. And now we're going to go to Max is going to lead on the rent reasonableness recap.
Yeah. All right, so we're shifting gears a little bit here, and so I just want to pause and double check that everybody's feeling good, good enough anyway, about those cost categories. We've got those things accessible in our minds, right? Not seeing any raised hands or questions. Cool. All right, so we are going to shift gears a bit here, and we're going to start talking about rent reasonableness, which is another kind of core consideration of running a CoC program. Beyond eligible costs, now we're sort of drilling down more into the cost category of rental assistance and or leasing. Most programs are going to be one or the other of those. There are a very small handful of projects that actually use both, but for the sake of today's presentation, I think we're mostly just imagining ourselves working with a project that is either using rental assistance or leasing. All right. So the concern with rent reasonableness is that we're aiming to make sure that rents are paid at a reasonable amount, a reasonable dollar amount in relation to other rents that are charged in the area for comparable units in that same rental market. So when we're comparing rents paid for unassisted units, we're looking for units of similar location, similar size, similar quality, similar age, and offering similar amenities and utilities. Now, there's a number of different things that I've just named here, but there are a couple that kind of stand out as most important, and you'll see that as we walk through this analysis. Next slide, please. So there's a couple different ways to assess rent reasonableness, and they're sort of related with one another. But each of these is going to govern exactly what our capped limit for the amount that we're actually able to spend on the particular unit that we're trying to get our participant into is governed by. So for leasing, you are typically on the left-hand side of the screen here. Like I said, we've got two different cost categories under consideration here. So if you're operating a leasing project, you're capped at what we call rent reasonableness. But for rental assistance on the right-hand side, you're capped at what we call the FMR, the fair market rent. And but you are capped at rent reasonableness. So in rental assistance, you can actually exceed the fair market rent, but you can never exceed rent reasonableness. With leasing, you can never exceed FMR and you can never exceed rent reasonableness. You are capped at the rent reasonableness amount, which tends to be smaller. And most important of all, down there in the bottom right, just remember that you have to continue to serve the number of contracted participants in your HUD contract. So when you apply, you actually state how many participants you're going to serve. If you say in the HUD application on eSnaps, when you're applying for your grant, we're going to serve 12 participants with this, you have to serve at least 12 people. You can always serve more if you find ways to do so, but you need to hit that minimum.
Max,
So,
I had a
yeah.
question in the chat around the minimum. What happens when folks leave the program and there's no longer the participant amount that we submitted to HUD? So
Yeah. In that event, then you now have a vacancy in your project, and it's time to take a new referral out of coordinated entry. So coordinated entry will have a queue of folks that are essentially waiting for assistance, housing assistance, and that vacancy in a perfect world will be quickly filled. Of course, yeah, we all know that our systems are not always perfect, but hopefully you can get a quick referral into that unit who is a good fit for the program. So in determining the amounts for FMR or rent reasonableness, a couple of reminders. First, FMR numbers are actually going to be published online by HUD for the corresponding geographic areas, and they're updated annually. So you want to make sure you're using the correct FMR for the year that corresponds to your grant's start and end date. So very important to pay attention to that, because your grant start and end dates are not necessarily matched to the calendar year. If we click, I believe we've got, I'm worried now because I know we were both editing at the same time, but I believe that hyperlink that is embedded into this presentation will take you to the 2025 FMR numbers. Perfect. So Sautica has dropped that in the chat for you. So most of you at this point are probably going to be using 2025 FMR numbers, and they can be found published by HUD at that link that Sautica just put in the chat. We'll also send all this out. This will be available to you in the follow-up email after today's session. Rent reasonableness, on the other hand, is determined by recipients and subrecipients. So you all are essentially the ones with the power to determine what the threshold is of rent reasonableness. When you consider the gross rent, you want to be looking at the location, quality, size, type, age, all those things that I just listed earlier. You're essentially running an analysis yourself on the market around you to determine what rent reasonableness means in that location. And you're essentially making the case for why you should be able to pay over FMR, assuming you're doing a rental assistance project. I hope that's making sense. I know this is a lot of pretext, but the rubber's about to meet the road here in just a second. So thanks for bearing with. Okay, so a little more pretext right before we get into that. First thing, best practice is to update your comparable units being used for review on an annual basis. So you kind of want to build it into an annualized work plan that you're going to be assessing your market for rent reasonableness by taking stock of other units around the area at least annually. It's important that your rent reasonableness reviews are conducted for all units prior to executing the lease. So if you don't manage to do that, you may have to terminate a lease and work to find a rent reasonableness unit that is, which is far more cumbersome than having followed the process from the beginning in the first place, right? We don't want to risk moving somebody into a unit only to discover that we can't establish rent reasonableness for that unit and have to disrupt the person's housing stability in order to get them into a different unit. So always try to be out ahead of the person leasing up to establish the rent reasonableness. To fail to do so, unfortunately, can lead to some financial liability for your program. There are 3 ways to document rent reasonableness, and we're going to go over the most common way today. There's actually a form available for you on OSHA's website, Office of Supportive Housing, Santa Clara. That method is actually a review of advertisements for comparable units. So you can literally just go on websites, Zillow, Redfin, whatever, and look at rental amounts for various units around the community. Craigslist is a great source as well, so that you can document rent reasonableness through a market study of those rents. Sorry, the other 2 categories, the other 2 methods to establish rent reasonableness is through a market study of rents charged, or else some written verification from property owners or management companies on letterhead affirming that the rent is comparable to that charged for similar unassisted units managed by that same owner. Unfortunately, both of those things are kind of cumbersome. You're working with a lot of other people and you're relying on them to be timely in response to you. So we find that most projects don't really bother with that approach. They tend to just go through the approach where the ball is fully in your court and you can run the analysis yourself. Okay, so during the activity that I'm about to walk you through, we're going to have 5 units, but only 3 of them are actually comparable to the unit that we're trying to rent. And we're going to be asking ourselves, what makes these units comparable? Again, location, size, type, quality, age, similar amenities, utilities. The three most important factors I alluded to earlier, the things that we're most paying attention to are going to be the location of the unit, the number of bedrooms in the unit, and the type of the unit. Like, what kind of building are we talking about? Housing condition is assessed across a few different categories. So it's either good, like it's well maintained, things are up to date, good working order, good condition, or it's fair. So expected condition for its age. If the building is 80 years old, we know that some of the unit features are going to be a bit outdated, but things are generally in working order and maybe there's some minor repairs needed. Or it's poor. Things are not in working order. The sanitation might be poor. Structural hazards might be at issue. Uneven staircases, exposed wiring, major repairs might be needed. And then when it comes to the amenities with the unit, we're looking at things like washer dryer, furnishings, new appliances, accessibility to transit, parking, pools, fitness centers, nearby parks, libraries, grocery stores, things like that. Accessibility is sometimes a big concern, especially with for folks with higher needs. Sometimes we want to be looking closely at whether or not these units are actually accessible to be able to call them comparable. Okay, so with all that in mind, and I know that's a lot to hold in your heads, I'm sorry. Let's move on to taking a look at the checklist. Okay, so like I said, this is found on Santa Clara CoC's website under the program management CoC forms. And I believe we're about to see that dropped in chat in just a moment here. And again, you'll have a link to this in the follow-up email. It'll be embedded in the slide deck for you. So we're going to focus on the top half of this form. And this form enables you to actually compare the proposed unit, the unit that the participant wants to live in, with three comparable units. You're going to compare them for things like we've just described: number of bedrooms, type of unit, housing condition, and any amenities. So let's take a look at the unit that the client actually wants to live in. It's the one that would slot into the far left column over here, the proposed unit. Next slide, please. So the proposed unit that we want to rent is down in Gilroy, and it's a 2-bedroom space. It is 600 square feet. That's it is a 2-bedroom. You'll have to bear with us for some of these measures. Might actually warrant a little updating. But let's say that this 600 square foot 2-bedroom unit was built in 1990 and it's in good condition. It's in a high-rise building. And amenities wise, they've got laundry in the building. They have new appliances. It's very close to transit, and it is ADA accessible. Utilities, we've got gas, and the gas bill is included in the rent. Okay. So we're going to keep that in the back of our minds. We're looking for units, essentially. We're looking for other units out in the market that compare closely to this unit. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think we have poll questions for each of these, and I'm going to try to, I don't know, Sadaka, is there any chance that the poll questions on yours are showing up different from mine? Because
You should be. When I click it, I get an error message that I can't do. I think something's wrong with the Zoom.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. So we're going to just rely on the chat box. Again, folks could just state whether they think that this unit is comparable or not comparable. Or you could just use the thumbs up, thumbs down emoji. That's perfectly satisfactory. So we've got our proposed unit down in the bottom right-hand corner, just for a reminder. It was that 2-bedroom in Gilroy, 600 square feet, built in 1990, good condition, in a high-rise, laundry in the building, new appliances near transit, ADA accessible, and gas utilities. I'm seeing some thumbs ups, and I appreciate that. So we've got 630 square foot 2-bedroom in Gilroy, built in 1987, so just 3 years ahead of ours, and it's in good condition. It's in a low-rise building, which is different, but it is laundry in the building, new appliances, near transit, and ADA accessible, and it's gas included in the rent. So I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up, and I think people are right. I feel good about it. Richmond is aggressively indicating that, yes, this is a good unit, and I tend to agree. This feels like a very comparable unit. We are not looking at rental amounts right now. We're just looking on finding units that are comparable across those other categories. In the next stage of our analysis, we're going to look at the rental amount for these different units and continue the analysis. All right, so next unit we're going to assess, and again, our proposed unit is still down there in the bottom right corner. This one's up in Mountain View, so kind of the opposite end of the county. It's a studio. It is 350 square feet. It's built in 1970, so it's quite a bit older than our 1990 apartment. It's in fair condition. This is an in-law unit, so it's not in a high-rise or low-rise structure. It's actually probably like an ADU or something like that in a backyard. There is no laundry. It is not ADA accessible. It is gas utility, but it is not included. How are we feeling about this one? Okay, I'm seeing a bit more of a mix so far. Okay, so some thumbs up, some thumbs down. I think more thumbs down at this point. And I think folks are generally correct. I think this is probably not comparable, right? Geographically speaking, it's not even close enough, really. And when we look at those main categories of consideration, the number of bedrooms, again, the square footage, the type of the unit, those are really top of mind. And this place is considerably smaller. It is more or less from a different era. And it is, we were looking at a 2-bedroom initially, and this is a studio. So it's feeling like this one's probably not good for our rent reasonableness analysis. Next slide, please. Okay. I think we started out with two that were more or less intuitive, right? Now let's take a look at this one that's a 2-bedroom in Gilroy. So that feels the same. This one's 550 square feet, and it was built in 1980, so 10 years prior to our unit. It's in good condition. It's also in a high-rise building. It's got laundry, new appliances, walking distance, ADA accessible, and it's got gas that's included in the rent. How are people feeling about this one? Okay, seeing a thumbs up. More thumbs up. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think we can agree. This is a pretty comparable unit, in fact. A couple notes to harp on real quick here is just this can get really challenging, and sometimes this does become more of an art than a science. 2-bedroom units, as in this example, are fairly common, but if you need a 6-bedroom unit because you're assisting a household that is considerably larger, you're going to need to look a lot farther away for units that are actually comparable. There are not a lot of places of that size available. Your client may also have needs that are not reflected in this chart, right? You know, they may be considering things like the school district that their kids are going to attend. Whatever the circumstance is, it's important to document your comparisons in the client's file so that HUD sees your thinking. So just because something is not included in the amenities and utilities and bedrooms and stuff like that we see on screen, you can tack on other considerations in the client file that say, my client is looking for a specific school district, my client has a considerably larger family, things like that that help justify why a unit might still need to be considered for the comparability assessment. You know, in the case that, say, HUD was asking, why are you looking at a unit that's 40 miles away or something like that, there may be some extenuating circumstances that you could document. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Okay, unit 4 is also in Gilroy. This one's 3 bedrooms, unlike our original 2-unit. This one's 800 square feet. It's built in 2010 and it's in good condition. It's in a high-rise building. The laundry is in the unit, new appliances, walking distance to different neighborhood amenities, grocery store, what have you. And it is ADA accessible. This one's got electric utilities and those are included in the rent. How are we feeling about this one? Do we think that this is comparable? Okay, so now I feel like I'm starting to see a bit more of a mix. We are seeing some yeses and we're seeing some nos, and we're going to err on the side of the nos. Now, this is just a quick reminder again of the three core comparisons that we're looking for here: the number of bedrooms, the type of the building, and the rental amount. The number of bedrooms is a big red flag here. 2 to 3 may not seem like that big a difference on its face, but you're really going to be trying to look for units that have the same number of bedrooms, especially when we're talking about units with smaller numbers of bedrooms. Like I said just a moment ago, if we're looking for places with like 6 bedrooms or something, then there's probably a little more leeway to look at places that don't have the same number of bedrooms. But those bedrooms, the type of building, and the rental amount are going to be the core considerations. And in fairness to you all, we're not talking about the rental amount yet, but the bedroom number is a big red flag. Okay. Let's take a look at our last unit. This one is also in Gilroy, and it is a 2-bedroom. It is a 650 square foot and is built in 1995. So it's 5 years later than ours, and it's in good condition. It's in a high rise, laundry in the building. It's got a balcony. It's near transit. It is accessible. This one, this example kind of cracks me up. This one's got propane. So ostensibly there's a truck coming by on a consistent basis to fill a propane tank somewhere outside of this high rise building to service the units inside the building. This is quite a unique setup that we've got for this example here. But how do we feel? Do we feel that this is comparable? Again, the core considerations are bedrooms, type of structure, and the rental amount, which again, we're not talking about rent just yet. All right. I am seeing some yeses, and I agree. I think that even though there's some odd distinctions in some of the amenities, we could probably call this unit comparable. So we've got some pretty extreme examples out there. I think we're just using those to try to illustrate the extreme limits of what is comparable or what is not comparable. I hope that folks were able to digest that and come along for the ride. When you're actually out there in practice, things are probably going to look a little neater, cleaner than this. Take a look at the next slide here. So on the top half of this rent reasonable checklist, we've got we've filled in proposed units and 3 comparable units, and the form itself actually says units 1, 2, and 3. I think I'd have to go back and see which one it was. Number 5, number 3, and number 1. So 1, 3, and 5 are actually according to the examples we were just looking at a moment ago, those would be the 3 units that you have now plugged into columns 2, 3, columns comparable unit number 1, 2, and 3. So now that we've got them all lined up neatly in here, we can see them right alongside each other in this table, and we can see how they're all sort of stacking up with each other. We can see they all have the same number of bedrooms. They're all in the exact same city. They're all, roughly speaking, in the same type of building, and these should say whether they're high rise or low rise. I'm sorry, it should specify. I think one of these buildings was a low rise. We can see that they're all in good housing condition, and then we can see that their amenities are roughly the same: laundry, appliances. We can see the type of utility that's coming into the unit, and now we can finally see the unit rent. And the unit that we're proposing to rent is 2,600. We've got a couple of units in our analysis that are over that amount, right? And then we've got one unit here that's just under that amount. And so we set this up so that, again, this table is essentially going into the client file to make the case in case a HUD inspector ever came by. We could say 2,600 is a fair amount to pay for this rent, even though it might exceed the fair market rent. And I'm sorry, don't look at that one. Look at the gross rent, because fair market rent takes into account the utility allowance. So when we state the case, we're saying, look, to have this client in another comparable unit out there. It could cost as much as $3,028, and we're only paying $2,824. It's a bargain at this rate. We've got a couple links down here at the bottom of this page for you, and I would encourage you to bookmark these as well. Keep those in your crib sheet for rent reasonableness analysis, the utility allowance schedule, and the the actual utility allowance schedule for 2025. And of course, that gets updated each year. So we've also included a link for where you would find subsequent years' allowance schedules.
And sorry, everyone, I would put it in the chat, but in this version, it's not all the way fully linked. So
okay.
the part of the slide deck we send out, apologize for that.
Right. I think on the next slide, I think we take a look at the bottom half of the form.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So on here, this is where we're actually doing math. I am a staff attorney. I went to law school because I cannot do math. So just trust me that this is where numbers happen. And this is where you're actually going to establish that the over on the far right hand side, the proposed FMR for, excuse me, the FMR for the proposed unit size is $2,839 based on the math that we've done for the comparable units in item B, and our actual unit gross rent is $2,824. So we can see that we have achieved, a rental amount that is below the FMR by a hair. What is that? I'm not doing public math. I'm sorry. Just trust me. I know that 2,824 is less than 2,839. All right. Okay. Let's see. What do we got next here? Policies and procedures on rent reasonableness. This is just some stuff that you need to make sure is within your agency's documentation. You have to have written policies and procedures to document your rent reasonableness. So you need a methodology that you use for documenting comparable rents. We just walked through one of those three options. The other two options that we talked about up top are reaching out to other people and waiting for them to respond, which is why most agencies prefer the rent reasonableness exercise and form that we just went through. You need your case file checklists and your forms. You need standards to certify comparable rents as reasonable. You need staffing assignments, and you need strategies for addressing special circumstances. So on their face, some of these things feel a little vague. Homebase, of course, is here to help you. OSH is here to help you. OSH, actually, I will sing their praises. We work with a lot of different communities at Homebase. OSH has a fantastic set of boilerplate forms and templates available for you on their website to help you satisfy these requirements more efficiently than having to build everything from scratch. And you can always send us an email. We're happy to help you find those things and keep you in compliance. All right. Any questions? I'm going to take a breath. Sadaka, do you mind fielding questions? And I'm going to go get some water real quick.
Yes, no problem. Any questions from folks? And please feel free to get off mute and ask directly. No questions. I will highlight too, we do have a resource page on the slides that will link you to every link that we've added to the slide deck and that we've shown you today. So please utilize that when you have the chance, or if you have any questions based off of today's presentation. And Max, I was just showing them the resource slide based off of all the links that we showed them. They can always use that to reference back. And these are all embedded in the presentation so far. So you can always use this to look things up, or if you have any questions, like Max said, you can always reach out to Homebase. And then Max, do we want to give folks a little bit of or go straight to the Kahoot activity?
Yeah, I forget, did we set ourselves up for an hour and a half or did we set ourselves up for 2 hours?
We set ourselves up for 2 hours.
Okay, cool. I we've covered a lot of ground already, and then we ended on math, which I just feel like is mean. So maybe everybody, if we could just take a 5 minute break. When we come back, we are going to move into the Kahoot exercise. So a reminder again. In fact, I believe I can probably drop that QR code in the chat again. Oops. All right, so I'm going to put that QR code in the chat again for folks to download Kahoot onto their device. Again, I recommend the device, but if you need to access it on the web, I believe you go to kahoot.it, KAHOOT.it, and there's going to be a code that I'll put up on screen here so that you can join the game. We'll start a 5 minute break here. We'll come back at 11:20, and this Kahoot quiz, I'm gonna guess, will take us about 15 minutes. And we'll probably be able to let y'all go early today. I don't think anybody's ever been mad that a meeting ended early. Okay. So I'll see you all at 11:20. In the meantime, get yourself some water, download the Kahoot app using the QR code in the chat box, not the one up on screen. Once you have the app, you can use the app to scan the QR code up on the screen, or you can punch in this game pin. And hopefully when I come back at 11:20, I'll see a bunch of folks eagerly waiting to win today's prize. Thanks, y'all. See you in a few minutes.
Hey everyone, if you're back from the break, if you can just give a thumbs up in the chat or put the thumbs up emoji, and then we'll get started on the Kahoot session.
So I see we have 7 people in for the Kahoot right now. Again, there is a prize. I strongly encourage you to participate. It'll be fun, I promise. There's animations, and if you haven't already noticed, I think there's background music. I hesitate to turn it up too loud, but maybe Sadika, you can tell me how's the balance between my voice versus the music.
Yeah. Sharing.
Can't have a game show without music, even if it is a little on the cheesy side. Can we get more participants? Maybe if folks can let me know also if you're having any difficulty joining. Again, you're gonna want that QR code in the chat box on Zoom to actually get the app on your phone. And once you have the Kahoot app, then you use the app to scan the QR code on the screen here, this one up here, or you can type in the PIN number to join the game. Thank you to all the brave souls, including Little Duck. Personally, I'm rooting for Little Duck. I appreciate that somebody is aiming to win anonymously. Joined by Owl now. There's an avian movement influx. We're open to chickens, roosters, crows, ravens, all of our winged friends who might want to join this Kahoot. All right, I'm feeling pretty good at 10. I'd love to see more if we can in this yes, avian movement influx. So if more people were to join before I finish stalling and hovering over this start button, that'd be awesome, but 10 feels okay. All right, I'm seriously, I'm about to click it. Okay, off we go. All right, everybody. So the way this works is you're going to have up to 4 options on your screen. Some of these are multi-select, so sometimes you have to select more than one, like this very first one here. So if you're struggling to spend down your rental assistance dollars, you can pay for unit vacancy, you can pay for security deposits, or you can pay for damage to the unit. You are going to see these symbols, these colored shapes on your device that allow you to select which of these answers you want to submit. Awesome. So I can see 2 people have already submitted answers. You get extra points if you submit quickly, but don't let that be to the detriment of thinking about your answer. All right. And look at that. We got all 10 people responded. Awesome. If you are struggling to spend down your rental assistance dollars, you can literally do any of these 3 things. All right. Let's see how we stacked up. Okay, Owl got to the response quickest. And sorry, I could have done a better job explaining this up top. I'm really sorry about that. You get extra points if you respond quickly, but you also, especially for these multi-select questions, want to think about it hard and make sure you select all of the applicable answers. Some of these, though, will just be binary. It's going to be, wrong or right. No multi-select. Okay, I hope that's clear. And pause here for a second, make sure I'm being clear. Anybody has any questions before I move on? Okay, cool. All right, this one's a standard quiz question. The following line items can be combined in one project: rental assistance and operating, short-term rental assistance with supportive services, rental assistance with acquisition, or rental assistance and leasing. All right. Nice. How many players do we have? Okay. And there it is. So the correct answer is that you can combine short-term rental assistance with supportive services in a project. All the rest of these can't necessarily be combined in a project. I guess a bit of a fringe and maybe a bit tricky, and I realize now, especially because I think I said something about this earlier, is the rental assistance and leasing. Technically, a joint THRH project can have both rental assistance and leasing, but the way that it's considered by HUD is that you essentially have two projects operating side by side under the umbrella of one. So maybe a bit of a trick question there. I'll concede to the strong number of you that also selected rental assistance and leasing, but for the sake of argument here, short-term rental assistance and supportive services can live together. Rental assistance and operating, want to call that one out real quick because operating is only available when you're doing a leasing project. Okay. Jason swinging into the lead. Ruby also moving. We got quite a bit of movement here. Tanisha and Richmond are almost neck and neck. All right. If I'm struggling to spend down my leasing dollars, I cannot pay security deposits, pay rent on a vacant unit that's still under lease, pay in advance on the first and last month's rent, or pay vacancy payments to hold over this unit for another participant. Ten seconds. And so I see a number of people said pay rent on a vacant unit still under lease. This is a tricky one because that would be applicable in a rental assistance budget line item, but in a leasing budget line item, sorry, vice versa, because we're looking at what we cannot do. So in a leasing project, we can pay rent on a vacant unit until the lease is up. So even if we had a 12-month lease and the participant vacated on the third month, we can actually continue paying for that unit for the entire duration of the lease, even if it's still vacant. The idea, of course, being that it's vacant during the time that we're waiting to get somebody else into that unit. The thing that we cannot do in a leasing project is pay vacancy payments. Vacancy payments are a function of rental assistance projects. And a vacancy payment is typically a 30-day window beyond the point after which a participant vacates that apartment. It's essentially like a grace period for us to try to find a new participant to move into that unit that the participant has moved out of. All right. Richmond is on fire. Richmond has a hat trick. Three correct answers in a row. Well done. This is another quiz question, just one correct answer. Which of the following expenses are not eligible under leasing? So it's an invoice from the moving company for moving Vernon Dent into a unit, staff time spent conducting an HQS inspection on 513 Lincoln Avenue, staff time writing checks to Dan Copenhagen Property Management for rent, or a monthly rent invoice from Dan Copenhagen Property Management. Which of these are not eligible under leasing? The correct answer is invoice from a moving company for moving Vernon Dent into a unit. Moving costs are under operating, so we would not be able to pay for this under leasing. All right, Owl has pulled ahead again. This is a multi-select, so you're gonna have the opportunity to choose more than one correct answer for this. One line items can be used for an electricity bill that is included in a participant's rent. So the cost of utilities is included in the participant's rent. Which of these budget line items would be usable for that payment? It's rental assistance and leasing. And I hope that's fairly intuitive, right? Because if the utility amount is included in the participant's rent, then essentially we're just paying the rent. And what do we use to pay rent? Depends on the type of project we've set up, but it's going to be one or the other of rental assistance or leasing. I'm glad to see a lot of people selected that. All right, Owl narrowly clinging on to the lead, Jason climbing up. Where can we use CoC funds to pay for furniture for a participant's use in their unit? This is actually from a recent TA question that we got. So the participant is going to use this furniture inside their unit. CoC funds cannot pay for the furniture. They can bill it to supportive services line item, and the participant gets to keep the furniture, bill it to operating, and the project keeps the furniture, or bill it to rental assistance, and the participant keeps the furniture. I say I learned a lot recently in trying to answer this question. So this is a tricky one. For the participants' use, if we're going to use CoC funds to pay for the furniture, we have to bill it to the operating line item, and the project actually keeps the furniture. So if the participant moves out, the furniture has to stay behind, and the furniture is there for the use of the next participant to come in. There are some very tricky rules around this stuff, like disposing of that furniture. We had a recent TA question where a client actually transitioned in place. They moved on from the program, but they remained in the exact same unit where they had been in a transitional housing component type, and the furniture was in there with them. But the furniture, because it was a leasing project, needed to essentially leave with the project in theory. But we did find a carve out. There was a weird situation. I'm happy to talk in more detail another time offline if folks are curious. But theoretically, the project could have sold that furniture to the client inside the unit so that they could keep it and not have to deal with restocking the whole unit with new furniture. Some interesting stuff going on there, but I'm glad to see a couple of you were able to sneak in a correct answer on that one. That was a tricky one. Tanisha climbing into the lead. Must be one of those two folks that got that right. In which situation can CoC operations funds be used on security guards? We've talked about this a couple times today. I hope everybody gets this right. Is it when over 70% of the units are CoC funded? Never. When over 50% of the units are CoC funded? Or when over 25% of the units are CoC funded? All right, I'm glad to see most of you got this right. So it is when over 50% of the units in that structure, that building, are CoC funded, we can use operating dollars to pay for security guards to patrol that building. Tanisha's on fire. Another quiz question is a multi-select. You're going to select all of the eligible expenses under supportive services. Which of these are eligible under supportive services? We got participants' legal fees for some citizenship and immigration issues. We've got a bill from the Bayview grocer for fresh produce delivery to Unit 7C. We got a Montessori invoice for the Dent family's 2 children. We've got participant legal fees contesting an eviction by a prior landlord. Which of these could we pay for under supportive services? And again, it's multi-select. Okay, so the only one that we can't pay for is the legal fees regarding citizenship and immigration issues. Depending on how you look at it, I'm going to go ahead and say, unfortunately, we cannot handle legal fees related to citizenship and immigration issues using federal dollars due to some, let's just say, some certain rules. There are other legal fees, though, that we can handle. Sometimes we can pay for custody fees, legal fees related to custody disputes. We can pay for legal fees. In this case, contesting an eviction by a prior landlord. That one's actually fairly self-explanatory because we are dealing with housing stability in that case. Trying to keep an eviction off somebody's record. Other things that we can pay for under supportive services, obviously, is going to be groceries. We already talked a lot about food when we're talking about that tomato plant, and Montessori school invoice. So that's child care, essentially, for the two kids. All right. Henry climbing onto the board. Tanisha holding on to the lead. Another multi-select question. All costs charged to the CoC must be. Is it documented, allowable, reasonable? Which of these three things must be for all costs that we charge to CoC funds, I should say. Kind of wish it showed up, and all costs need to be rad, right? They need to be reasonable, allowable, and documented. Maybe a little bit of a trick question. Literally all of these things are true. Tanisha is on fire. That's 5 correct answers for Tanisha so far. Well done. What costs are eligible in the CoC program? Is it all costs that we find included in the CoC interim rule? Is it all the costs that are included in a project's approved budget? Or is it none of the above? Almost everyone has answered. Here we are. It's all of the costs that are included in the CoC interim rule. So this is really a test on the difference between eligible versus allowable. Costs included in a project's HUD-approved budget would be allowable. Those are the costs that you have applied for and therefore are allowed to spend on. It's kind of a throwback to a lot of the material that we covered in the LMS. So for those of you that didn't get a chance to run through the LMS yet, please do register, run through the LMS course. It's self-directed, so you can go at your own pace, and it'll cover a lot of those little nuances that we didn't talk about today. Where should staff time be billed? You can't bill staff time. Or is it the admin budget line item? Or is it just wherever you've got money left over, wherever there's room? Or is it according to the eligible activity that staff are actually performing? I was wondering if anybody was going to say that staff time can't be billed. I think that person's got a sense of humor. The admin budget line item is that's very tempting, right? It was the red herring here. The correct answer is that we want to always bill the eligible activity staff that the staff are actually performing. So to the extent that they are performing rental assistance duties, the classic example is they're actually spending time cutting checks to the various landlords that work with the project. You want to bill that to rental assistance, actually. It's tempting to just bill everything to admin. But generally speaking, think critically about the category that they're actually performing and carrying out. That's where you want to bill that time, because that's one of those things that allows us to bill down some of those categories that are more restrictive. Supportive services is flexible. Admin, a little bit flexible by comparison. Rental assistance is hard to bill. So definitely want to bill that as much as possible. What types of housing can be paid using rental assistance? Is it transitional housing? Is it permanent supportive housing? Is it rapid rehousing? Or is it none of the above? All right. It is all three of the component types that we had listed on screen. Again, it's going to depend on how you applied for the project, how you set it up when you actually applied during one of our CoC NOFOs. But you could use rental assistance to pay for any of these three component types. Note, of course, that transitional housing is only ever covered under joint TH/RRH projects nowadays. You can't apply for standalone TH projects for the last, gosh, it's got to be coming up on 10 years or something, maybe even longer. Okay, Tanisha's still holding on to the lead, but Henry is moving up with 6 correct answers in a row. Well done. Property damage costs are covered up to what limit under rental assistance? So is it up to 3 months rent once per participant? Is it up to 2 months rent once per participant? Is it up to 1 month's rent once per participant? Or is it an amount equal to the security deposit? So this is when we're trying to pay for damage to the property using rental assistance dollars. If you go to the interim rule, there's actually a specific carve out for this. It's a very tricky question because we tend to think of security deposits as being used to cover damage to the unit, and that is true. And you can actually use rental assistance dollars to pay for the security deposit. But we can also use rental assistance dollars to pay up to 1 month's rent worth of damage to a unit once per participant. So it's another one of those tricky ways we can spend down one of the more restrictive budget line items. Keep that one in mind. We don't actually have to use the security deposit itself. In the midst of the person still living in the unit, we can make repairs up to the amount of 1 month's rent one time during their tenancy. What can you do if you have rental assistance dollars left over? It's kind of related to that previous question. Damage to the unit could have actually been on this list, but it's not. We're offering covering certain staff costs. We're offering to serve more participants, or we're offering to cover the costs of rent over FMR. All right, it is literally all three of these things. You can use the rental assistance dollars to cover certain staff costs. Like I said, to the extent that staff are carrying out rental assistance activities, i.e. cutting checks to landlords, that's staff time spent on that, you could pay for that. You could also pay to serve even more participants than you contracted for. We alluded to that earlier. You only applied for 10 participants and you find enough money to serve 12 in your grant term, go for it. We love that. You can also cover the cost of rent over the fair market rent. All right. Richmond is moving back into the top 3 here. Multi-select question. What can operating costs be used for? Can we use it for the maintenance and repair of the housing? Can we use it for the internet? Can we use it for water? Can we use it for electricity? And remember that if we're talking about operating dollars, we're talking about a leasing project. You can only apply for operating budget line item when you're using leasing dollars to pay for the rent itself. So it is a lot of these things, it is not internet. That's really important for us to remember. Unfortunately, despite the reality of life today in 2025, we still can't pay for internet as a core utility. We can pay for water, we can pay for electricity, we could pay for gas. It's not on this list, but maintenance and repair of housing is another obvious one. We cannot pay for the internet, regrettably. Trust me, I'm mad about it. All right, Henry is pretty firmly solidifying that lead, but Tanisha is still not far behind. We've got a number of, 3 questions left, I believe, in this quiz to make up that difference. Which of the following categories are not eligible under supportive services? Try not to be distracted by the adorable cat shaking its head. Is it case management? Is it employment assistance? Is it security guards? Or is it substance use treatment? Which of these categories can we not pay for using supportive services? We're kind of flipping one of the earlier questions on its head. Awesome. I'm thrilled to see that. It is the security guards. Security guards can be paid for using operating dollars, assuming that 50% of the units that we are assisting in the building are paid for with CoC funds. And this also assumes that it's a leasing project. Oof. All right. Henry is on a major hot streak, 10 questions in a row. Well done. All right, another multi-select question. Which of these are included under supportive services, legal services? Alluded to this actually just a moment ago. Landlord-tenant disputes, legal separation, guardianship. Which of these could we pay for using supportive services, legal services? This is another one of those things that you find more details about in the LMS. So those of you who actually got to do LMS are going to have a bit of an edge here. It's all three of these things. Again, so that immigration thing is the real standout. That's a pretty common service that people need these days that is not covered under CoC legal services. Oh boy. All right. So I was wondering, wow. All right. So Henry and Tanisha are like neck and neck. I think there is one question left in this quiz. We got a real nail biter on our hands here, folks. All right, quiz question. Which of the following is not an eligible subcategory of supportive services? Which of these is not in that laundry list of things? Is it transportation? Is it outpatient health? Is it life skills training? Or is it reimbursement for volunteering? Something we can't pay for using supportive services dollars. Despite the relative flexibility of supportive services dollars and how tempting it is to just bill everything for supportive services, it is reimbursement for volunteering. Absolutely. All right. Let's see what happened. Let's take a look at our podium. Third place, Jason. Well done, Jason. 9,057. Henry in second. And atop our podium, I think we all know who it is. It's Tanisha. Tanisha crushing it. Tanisha wins today's prize. Very well done. A round of applause. Where's my reaction button? All my reaction buttons are missing. I want to clap. Do I have to stop sharing screen in order to clap? That's messed. Okay, I'll physically clap. What's stopping me? I've got two hands. I'll use them. All right. Well done, everybody. That was actually a very competitive round. I really enjoyed that. I hope you all did too. I really like Kahoot. So to the extent that you see me running trainings for you all here in Santa Clara, I will bring you more Kahoot. I will give you more opportunities. I think our go-to prize these days has been a gift box of coffee from a Black-owned coffee roaster based in Oakland. So stay tuned for your next opportunity to win some awesome Red Bay coffee. Highly recommend them. I think I should probably turn off the music. All right. Thanks, everybody. Sadaka, were there more slides for us to put up?
No, that was it. I'm gonna put in the chat though, a link to the feedback survey for folks. If you get a chance, it should take about 1 or 2 minutes, not too long. Just put it in the chat, and I wanted to give two folks, we have a couple of more minutes, about 12. If anyone had any questions on the Kahoot quizzes, or any questions about the training in general, any clarification, this is the time. You can come off mute and feel free to put in your questions or comments. And I hope everyone had fun. The game seems really fun and a little competitive, but seems like a very interactive way to hone down some of those concepts.
Yeah. I like to invite a little bit of competitiveness, but we get so used to the collaborative atmosphere. I think that's one of the things we all love about this work is that we're all on the mission together. We're all just doing our best to provide the best service that we possibly can to our neighbors. And I so appreciate all of you. These are seriously one of the favorite things about my job is running these trainings and get to be face to face with you all. There's our email in the chat for you, Santa Clara CoC at homebaseccc.org. That's where you can reach out to us for questions and clarifications on those CoC rules, anything. Doesn't have to be eligible costs. We're happy to talk to you about managing client files. Happy to talk to you about prospective program design if you're thinking about ramping up a new project in the next CoC NOFO. Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that. And I hope to hear from everybody in the feedback survey, please. We're always looking to improve these things. Constructive feedback is more than welcome. We want to know what we can do to serve you all better so that you can continue serving our neighbors better. So.
And I will make sure to send you the updated slides with all the proper links. And I'll also post them on the SPN and CoC listserv, and they'll also be the recording too on the OSH website.
And remember to bookmark the CoC interim rule. Thing is super helpful. And the more you just kind of play around with it, if you get some free time at your desk, just go into those eligible costs and try to familiarize yourself with some of the stuff that's written in those different 5 cost categories we covered today. You'd be surprised what you can pay for with some of those more restrictive categories. Rental assistance and leasing are notoriously hard to spend down. But there are a couple of tricky things you can do in there, like paying for security deposits, paying first and last month's rent up front. If you're finding that you're having a hard time spending down that money and it's near the tail end of your grant, go check. You can probably squeeze a little more money out of that budget line item. And that frees up some of those other cost categories like admin and supportive services where we sometimes overbill. Now that money's freed up so we can do other fun activities like get our clients to childcare, get our clients to employment services and certification courses and all that good stuff, fostering independence. Yeah. And if you can't already tell, we are compliance nerds. We love this stuff. We will read the HUD regulations until we are blue in the face so that you don't have to. So hit us up, please, anytime. I love TA questions. They shake up my day. Right.
And then, Tanisha, we will follow up with you via email about getting you your prize.
Yeah. Congrats. That was, yeah,
You did
that was
great.
a very close match. Thank you for the nail biter. I think we're all good. I don't see any questions coming in. Sounds like folks had a good time, learned some new things. Look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you all for coming today.
Yeah. Please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with my bad jokes. I'm a dad now. I have to do that. It's part of the job.
That's right. I forgot that. Welcome back too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. For those of you who are still lingering, I'm going to show you a hilarious photo of my kid that he's got quite a personality.